This Cap Times podcast is brought to you by Exact Sciences Corporation, the makers of Cologuard. Learn more at exactsciences.com.
If I really want the food experience, I can get curbside if I'm willing to brave that. But most of the time, what I'm missing is just the place and the people that I ate with, that I could sit across the table from.
Hello, this is The Corner Table, a podcast about food and drink in Madison, Wisconsin, produced by the Capital Times. I am Lindsay Christians.
And I am Chris Lay. If you have been listening to this podcast, you know that we try to keep it pretty light around here, especially given the bummer of a year that we've all been having. But as we reach the end of 2020, thank the Lord above, and COVID-19 continues to stomp all over our dreams, it is pretty clear that not all of the restaurants we love are going to make it through the winter, which is incredibly scary and sad.
So we've been thinking a lot about what we miss when a restaurant like Manna Cafe or Sunroom, Captain Bill's, Charlie's on Main, even Graft on the Square, when those close, what do they leave behind? What do we remember, and where do those stories live?
We talked this week with JonMichael Rasmus and Nichole Fromm, who are founders of the blog Eating in Madison A to Z. And they're also authors of the 2015 book Madison Food, A History of Capital Cuisine. Their newborn daughter, Dahlia, who wasn't even 2 months old when we recorded this, also makes the occasional appearance.
This episode of the podcast will not only wrap up the year, it will also be our last corner table for the immediate future. We will have one more treat before the new year, so stay tuned after this interview.
At the very least, Lindsay and I are going to be taking a couple of months off to retool and re-energize for whatever comes next, which will be something. We'll be back with something.
For now, give a listen. Welcome, JonMichael and Nichole. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
I was thinking about, the end of this year and how we're going to be looking back. And it struck me that people always seem so shocked when restaurants close. Like there's always this shock and sometimes dismay that's expressed when restaurants decide to close for whatever reason. But I think that maybe better than most that restaurants don't last forever. So my first question for you is, when restaurants close, what do they leave behind?
Sure. Well, we talked briefly about this. We're like, ceramic glassware. We own, I think, a piece of Sunprint paraphernalia, and occasionally there's a excuse me. Not doing as good a job.
Okay, continue your thought.
Okay, so yeah, we own a piece of Sunprint paraphernalia. We have been to some restaurants that are using the former name of the restaurant on their coffee mugs. Beyond that, and of course, there's a certain linguistic quality of which, that's in the old blank place. Mm-hmm. That's in the old, and unless it's a place like where Haveli is in Fitchburg, which was at least 6 different restaurants in the decade or so that we were eating regularly. Usually they only end up with one name, like, that's in the old underground kitchen space. That's what we said about heritage when that happened.
So glassware, cookbooks, a lot of your more adventurous restaurants leave behind really great legacies in form of cookbooks, as well as menus. I know that, and Chris, you especially, about the library and historical collection of menus. That's pretty cool.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. And also, we're kind of talking not out of experience on this, but it does seem that there are sort of family lines and traditions that are passed down amongst the creative people that have cooked, that have planned, that have taught and mentored each other or competed with one another. I think that sort of genealogy probably also pervades the whole social ecosystem too. And then the thing I just thought of, we'll come back to that, but sometimes they also leave EPs of comedy tapes, comedy songs, like Rocky Rococo has a tape called Kitchen Licks. Yes.
Oh yeah.
I've never heard
6
of
comedy
this.
tracks are on that cassette tape.
Yeah, I think Ben Munson wrote that up for Tone Madison around the time that Rocky Rococo's,
Jim Peterson.
Yeah, passed away. So yeah, that is out there, and there are clips of it on YouTube if anybody wants to be an intrepid internet, time traveler and find them.
I feel like cookbooks were like the Bluefies cookbook, for example. I don't know if that was like trendy for a little while. I've heard that Tori Miller is working on a cookbook that I have not yet seen. But there are like that seems to be like there's an Ovens of Brittany cookbook, and that was very influential here locally too. Did you use those as materials when you were doing research for the book?
We did, actually, because it was a great source to hear what restaurants wanted to say about themselves, right? The foreword, which recipes they chose to include, which they determined to leave out. So there's no recipe for a morning bun in that Ovens of Brittany cookbook.
Sadly.
That's kind of amazing to me. Now, granted, what I've heard about the morning bun is it takes at least 3 days because there's yeast and all kinds of proving and rising and things that have to happen with it. So I probably wouldn't make one myself. Although, what am I doing now anyway? Maybe I would.
If there was ever a time to try, now is the time.
Yeah. Not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the reason why you guys are here to talk about restaurants is you have the book, Madison Food, History of Capital Cuisine. But then, I guess, would you consider it previous to that? Or is the Madison A to Z.com still, do you still consider it active? I mean, the website's there and your archive of everything that you've done is there, but it hasn't been updated in a while for, obvious reasons. You guys had the book and everything else. So that's why you guys are here and why you, know stuff about restaurants.
I would say that the blog as words, we probably agreed to take down about 2 years ago. We were finding it difficult to write about, cheeseburgers at places that had Pepsi menu boards with changeable letters in any sort of intelligible way. So we decided that we would continue to eat at restaurants, but our writing on them slowed down dramatically. And then we would we've got 43 more of these that we need to write. Maybe we just could post some pictures, and that would be sufficient. And we were slowing down. We were also every so often we'd hit a place that was really hard to get to, and my job had changed such that it was hard for us to even get to places for dinner in a reasonable time. I would not get home from work until 6:30 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of challenges to sort of keeping it updated, and so we still were eating alphabetically. We just weren't necessarily writing and sharing our incisive thoughts about various things that were served with French fries and cheeseburgers. But then when the pandemic happened, we're like, well, we're not doing this for a while. We're not going to make it to Wall Street Bistro and Mazamani anytime soon.
True.
So that's where we've obviously been for the last 9 months, is just in a holding pattern for that reason. It may be something that we're interested in picking up again, but it may be something that just will sit as it sits. But we're not going to take it down. We're going to keep, paying the web hosting fee for the blog, because we do consider it a resource of the things that we gathered in the past and the historical artifact that it is.
Absolutely. I met you guys on Twitter close to 10 years ago, thereabouts. And I remember you invited me, I think back when my Twitter handle was maybe Pickles Dickles, I think. I can't even remember what it used to be at the time. But you had me show up to the Dandelion food cart on Library Mall, which, speaking of closures, has since closed down. But yeah, so that was that was back when you could really meet fun, interesting, random people on Twitter in Madison. Just these, kind of strangers. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Aww.
There has been something, it's hard to say what it is, but there's something that's been lost from sort of the early days of the internet, when just sort of like being on the internet was interesting enough. Now it's, now you're an influencer or whatever
Yeah. I wanted to connect sort of your work with Eating in Madison A to Z, and then the book, which takes a very different tone, right? But when you think about like the Madison restaurant scene in like the 2010s, what are some ways that it looks the same or different than in the previous decades that you discovered through working on the book?
Well, I think that something happened in the 2010s that we stumbled into by accident, because we started the blog in 2004 and finished the first list in 2012. Something happened during that time, even on a national scale, where the rise of celebrity chefs, there was a major blossoming of sort of foodie culture, to the point where foodie was no longer a niche. It was sort of what everybody did. And it was totally an accident that we did our blogging at the same time that was happening. But the result was that there was a lot more turnover and a lot more real creative energy, and even like a celebritification of people, and hand in hand with what was development in Madison, and basically it's a very affluent city, right? So you've got a lot of creative resources. So I noticed that is what happened, and we happened to be there by accident, documenting it in an amateur way. But yeah, then suddenly, like, even reviewing food and writing about food, or emulating chefs at home, all became the things that normal people did. And much like the internet, it wasn't just a hobbyist thing. It was much more mainstream. And again, I think that was part of a national trend. I'm not a pro to speak, about it real in detail, but Kevin Alexander, I was just reading his book called Burn the Ice.
It's a great book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, wow, Madison could be in this book, except that it's a little bit too small. But we were just right in line with that trend of a huge interest in blossoming in food and restaurants.
Yeah.
And just to finish that and go back a little bit on the internet point, when we started, blogs were relatively newish. There's no YouTube, there's no Instagram, there's no Yelp even at that point. People aren't even able to write, they brought out the cheese curds 20 minutes late. I mean, there's none of that really exists in the web space. And I think part of the reason that all of that stuff grew on the chef side and on the restaurant side is because they were starting to get the feedback loop close with, people were starting to talk about eating out. People were starting to connect and form community in their community about restaurants and things like that. And now the question is, like, as the 2010s progressed, in what ways did that, some of that stuff just become surface, and in what ways does, like, you can't sustain that kind of growth and energy throughout the decade. So, as when I think about the turnover of restaurants that we had in the early teens, as we were finishing the blog, there was a lot less turnover toward the end of the decade. but that's partly because a lot of the vacant spaces just stayed vacant.
Yeah.
Nobody decided that they were going to bet the house on a restaurant idea.
Yeah. And I think State Street is probably the best example of, storefronts that are empty and tend to stay empty now. You mentioned Sunprint earlier. So, when you guys were looking through archives and stuff, well, first of all, where were you getting a lot of your historical resources for researching this? I know like the diner scorecard column has been going on since the 70s, I think, in the State Journal, and yeah. So where else were you guys getting stuff, and what was like one of the more surprising aspects that you guys stumbled upon in all those dusty archives?
Oh, sure. Well, I think I started at the clippings file at the Madison Public Library. So actually your old-fashioned upright, somebody clipped newspapers apart and filed them in manila folders for years.
This is what we did before the internet.
This is what librarians contribute to the world.
Absolutely.
And it was golden because there was a file folder on a person or a restaurant or even a street or an event. And so I would start there. I would start, tracing names of people who were involved in things. And then it was easy to search the online archives of newspapers. Even before things were reviewed, there were ads, of course. And so you could always track things with ads, telephone directories, property records.
Yeah, I spent a couple of days in the with the business directory listings, which go all the way back to 1870, and you can what called themselves a restaurant, in this first edition of the Madison City Directory, and of course that was complicated because at the time a lot of things that you would think of as restaurants were just calling themselves bars and taverns at that time.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, that's where we started. And then, of course, there were reviews, of restaurants. And unfortunately, we didn't do as much interviewing of real live people as I would have liked to. And the book was way too short. It was not allowed to be long enough to include some of the stories I would have wanted to. And thankfully, I'm seeing that being rectified somewhat, particularly with the African-American restaurant legacy here. I really feel like I could find hardly anything in those clipping files. And I think that's a cause and effect, maybe, of some of the racially based silencing of stories that we have in this city, unfortunately. But I think that's being rectified with books like Setlin, and people are telling their own stories now. So that's really great. Yeah. So there were some gaps in our paper files. We tried not to fill them in with lies as best we could.
Right.
I have to say there were a couple things that I really loved about the book. One of them was I started thinking about the hot dog carts all over the city and being like, where are our hot dog carts? Man, where'd they go? We still like hot dogs. How come they're not here anymore? Anyway, that was one thing that I remembered. And then I remembered also you deal with some really tricky stuff, some challenging issues, with mental health around the ovens of Brittany and everything there. And when you're trying to talk about people's stories and you don't want it to be a tell-all, but you also don't necessarily want to leave out things that are maybe important and informative about the history of these places. And so I wonder, as we're looking at maybe some more closures this year of restaurants in a time that was really difficult, I wonder if you have any perspective on how you handle talking about the things that maybe aren't as pretty or happy or around the way we normally talk about going out to eat for a good time.
Right. Thoughts?
Yeah. I think our goal was to present things factually without any sort of loaded language or without judgment associated with it. So, if someone, for example, I don't remember that we did this, but if someone embezzled something, we wouldn't say that they became greedy or that they were swiping from the till. We would probably just say this person was charged with embezzlement, which led to the dissolving of the business arrangement with them and their partner. Just to try to keep it as factual as possible. There's fun stories. There's ways to express good stories. We do spend a fair amount of time on talking about a little bit about the Madison legacy of Eddie Ben Elson, and he's a real colorful character and very, very funny. But it is also true that he had a mental health problem, and that led him to take his own life. And we want his life to be recognized and his death to be a fact of his life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, there are also, so many stories like you mentioned of not necessarily embezzling, but I know that there were, a handful of places where drugs were a huge problem in the 70s. And what was it? There was a Mexican restaurant, I think, that, was kind of a well-known drug front, and just a big, kind of a, So.
Right. We tried not to, even though people love to then come to us and say, well, about that place, wink, wink. That's just, that's part of the oral history too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something else that I'm reminded of is there's a lot of arson and a lot of fires as well, a lot of supposed arson. Telling the story of the end of a restaurant, it can be sad, but generally the personalities who made it possible and who brought it to life go on to other better, sometimes different good things, and that can always be something to celebrate. I think in the context of this summer too, I was thinking a lot of the summer of Act 10, when our consciousness was also massively raised around labor rights and labor issues. And I think that that's come up again this summer, just the overall call for justice as well. Labor drives this whole industry, and the industry as a whole has not had a great track record in treating people well. And that's really something that I hope we can take a lesson from and really change. And as eaters, to have a conscience about it as well. It's not a new issue, but I'm hopeful that's a trend a lesson we can take from this, where essential workers, they're not expendable. And to be a frontline worker, to put your life on the line for someone else's pleasure, it's a serious thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I know for me, I think it has definitely put a lot more of a spotlight on the gig economy and, people that are doing the food deliveries. Seems like that's the, stratifying of the class divide and everything like that. It's definitely opened up a lot more conversations that are, and made things that were kind of tangential to food much more directly linked.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think about some of the restaurants that have closed this year, like Manna Cafe for one, or even like Graft on the Square. Like my friends would go to Graft every time they had a special occasion, and it became a really special place for them. And, even places like Sunprint, you mentioned Sunprint. What do you think makes a restaurant memorable? Like, why do we remember the restaurants that we remember?
Well, I think about the restaurants that I most specifically remember, and I think it's oftentimes bound up in a time of life. There are either you do something special at that location. I mean, when I look back on we ate at 777 restaurants in the first pass. And, those meals I can remember off the top of my head, probably only a handful. And they tend to be when there was something special that was associated with it. Maybe it was an anniversary. Maybe it was taking an out-of-town friend out for a specific meal.
So someone special, probably. I mean, Lindsay, you mentioned, it's the people that you eat with. And Chris, it's the food carts you visit with near strangers from the internet. I think that it's the people.
Absolutely.
And then you have an experience to look back on that you can share. And I think in our second pass, when we did start trying to eat at every corner bar with a Pepsi menu, it might have been boring to write about the food because the food was so very much the same across the board. But those places were clearly, gathering places for people. They meant a lot because that's where your friends are. And it's hard to stay home because that's where your friends are. And that illustrates what a hard spot we're in with this stupid pandemic.
Absolutely.
So I think that's what makes it memorable. I don't know how, maybe it's one person's idea to get started going to a certain place. But then it becomes a tradition pretty quick, and then and that's what it is. Now, of course, if you're just seeking new experiences, then of course it's going to just be, how good is the food? How affordable is the price? Is it something spectacular that you want to keep coming back for? So,
and of course, I think there's something to be said for maybe. Let me say that there's sort of two things. One, if there's a menu item that sort of when I would have described Bluefie's cookie dough egg rolls back in the day, that was something that was like, okay, when I come to Madison, I want to try that. I'm going to come and visit you, and we're going to go and we're going to get that. The same thing was true with the Nutella pizza at Cafe Porta Alba, and I think lots of places are like that. There may be food types that fall into that category as well. Like when I get sushi, I go to Muramoto. Like when I get sushi, I go to, that's what I do. And the final thing to think about was that it's possible that there's a menu that when this group of friends gets together, that person loves this person, there's nothing objectionable for that guy who's picky. This person gets this. And I never have to think when we go to Graft. I never have to think when we go to Vintage. When we go to this restaurant, everybody's going to be happy. Everyone's going to have a
good time.
Yeah, everyone's got a menu item that they want, and we don't have to worry like we do when we go to the Korean barbecue that somebody else is going to turn up their nose at anything with kimchi on it.
For sure.
Yeah. Sort of like there was a pizza at Greenbush that all the Barriques employees would get every time they went with like goat cheese and banana peppers and stuff. And they all remember exactly what was on that pizza. All those employees like, okay, yeah, this is the Barrique staff pizza kind of thing from the Monroe Street Barriques. I was remembering too, when Four Quarter closed last year, I ran into Johnny Hunter outside and I said, you started this, like your team started this, but it became ours. Like it was mine too. And I had ownership of that place just because I spent so many hours playing cards at the bar, and just hanging out. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's the food is important, but so is the vibe.
Absolutely.
And that comes from the people you're with and the people that are there.
This podcast is brought to you by Exact Sciences. Join the Madison-based team working to lead earlier cancer detection. Visit exactsciences.com to view the company's hundreds of open jobs.
So, I mean, if anything, 2020 has definitely shown us that making predictions is tough. but with everything kind of being as up in the air as it is, and with your deeper understanding of the cycles and churn of Madison's overall restaurant scene, I mean, are there any predictions or hopes or expectations of how this might shape up and how the food scene here is going to look in 5-10 years, or how we're going to look back on this and what's risen from the ashes and what never comes back, or I don't know. That's a big bite to chew on, but
Sure.
Well, we can dream. If everybody feels the way I do, we're going to see a lot more comfort food and just a lot more places that are comfortable for being in with people again. The food might take a sideline maybe in a lot of places where you just want to get together with people and not be at home. I would think places like that would do well, but also places that do creative things that you can't cook at home, or that you're not willing to, like a morning bun. One of the things that always guided our choice of what to eat at a restaurant was, how likely am I to try to cook this at home? Or is it an ingredient that I think is really gross and I would never want to buy and try to cook and mess up at home? Like, I'll buy the organ meat dishes when I'm out because there's a professional making them taste good. So I think, between comfort and adventure, maybe a little, we might see some interest in that.
I think we're going to go through a period where there's not going to be a lot of restaurant closings in the 2 years after the pandemic lifts, just because if they made it through that, they were on pretty firm footing and are going to be pretty stable. That said, there probably will be a period of time in which there aren't necessarily a lot of restaurant openings either, just because people are trying to get their footing back. They're not necessarily, hey, we just survived this, let me go run out. I think at some point we will turn that corner and people will continue to dream of, hey, I want to own a restaurant, and I make a really mean X dish and I want to share that with others, or I'm coming out of school, there's young kids who've maybe now been trained as pandemic chefs for their families, turn 21 and decide that they want to go and learn and found restaurants themselves. I think ultimately we'll see a wave of that. Just when is hard to say. But I do think that there was a reset button that 2020 provided, which was that, there was probably, but Madison's probably always had, at least since the 90s, too many restaurants relative to what it could reasonably support. And through tourist trade and some other stuff, we were able to keep that many balls in the air. And now the contraction seems like that was just what was going to happen as a result of this. That said, we did lose some very, storied restaurants here. But again, as we talked about when our book came out, we tried to pick some restaurants that we thought were pretty permanent to write about in that, and 2 of them closed within a week of the book coming out.
And several more have closed since.
Oh man. I mean, it becomes a time capsule as soon as it's between binding, right? Like it's.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And restaurants are, with, you think about art, music, those things, once they're made, everyone can experience them. But for me, having moved here in 2007, like I'll never get to eat a Rennebaum's brownie. There are just certain very specific things that I can admire and I can, have the recipe from, that might have been published in a Cook's Exchange article, but I will never know how close that is to the actual taste of what that experience was at the time. And so it's good to have the reviews and the journalism about those things. But with restaurants, it's so hard to go back and, wrap your head around what those things were. It's
so much more ephemeral. I'll just tell this story briefly. So I moved here in September of '99, and Nichole and I were engaged at that point, and she wanted to. So she would visit me some weekends, and I had some friends who had gone to school in Madison and were still here. And one weekend, when Nichole was down, they said, well, what we should do is we should go to Ovens Brittany. Now, in 1999, I had no idea, what that meant or, what, like, okay, we'll go to wherever you want to go. And we went and we ate, and neither one of us can remember what we ate. Neither one of us can remember if we even necessarily liked it, or we're like, hey, let's go back to this. Or we know we ate there, but that is the extent of what we know about that restaurant experience. And when we're doing the research for the book and we're identifying that, Ovens and Brittany is kind of the inflection point, the time that Madison sort of went from being sort of normal Midwestern, maybe college towns, who's a Chinese restaurant. To sort of being like, hey, there's a bunch of people here and they really make a bunch of really great restaurants. And, that's the inflection point. And we're like, so we ate there and we have no memory at all.
It was wasted on us. The experience totally wasted.
We didn't know at the time that you were going to want to remember it later. It was just lunch or whatever. It's as we think about sort of looking back and looking forward, kind of back and forth here at the end of the year, which is something I think we do at the end of most years, right? I've been thinking a lot recently about how service is going to look different, and like both kind of what we're going to be expected to do for ourselves as diners, but also just the few times that I've eaten out on patios, the more formal service where somebody keeps coming by to refill your wine glass, or your wine glass, or give you new silverware. Stop coming by my table, like just right. And I want a heads up when you do. And I think that's going to linger even after we're all happily vaccinated. There's still some of that, like, it's nice to flip a little card and call your server over. And maybe that means there can be fewer servers who are paid better, or they can more equitably split with the back of the house, which is more of an issue, right? But I'm so curious how service is going to look different. We were talking earlier about Yelp and how people express their opinions there. And everybody's got a platform, and that's great because more voices is good. And democracy of those voices, right? That's always good, I think, more voices. But I'm really curious how we as a dining public are going to respond to some of the changes in service that are going to have to happen because of the pandemic, and also because the restaurant industry needs to be more equitable than it is. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that as well.
Oh,
kind of a long question.
Oh, that's good. Well, I don't know where we're headed, but I do know that as we researched the book, the idea of what a restaurant was and how service worked changed many, many times over the years. So
yes.
It started out as taverns that would just put salty food out on the bar in an enticement to get you to drink more. And there was just a bartender, right? Or then there was the cafeteria style, which was a trend that came to us from the West Coast. And I don't know if we ever had an automat.
Yeah, I don't know that we were that fancy.
And of course, the carts, as was mentioned, those are basically a 1 or 2 person operation. So all these things evolved and changed over time. So I think you're absolutely right, Lindsay. Something is going to be retained that we learned was a good idea, even though we were forced into it. So I'm curious. That may happen.
One of the other things is that I would say that restaurants, especially in Madison, have been pretty good about using found space. Mm-hmm. I think about the first location of what was it, Cafe Costa Rica, that little downstairs 4-top cramped space off Butler. Just
in the basement of the hostel, right?
Right,
yeah.
Right, and Dottie Dumpling's Dowry was in a Quonset hut off of Monroe Street at a time. And I'm just curious how, what the reverberations are going to be of the pandemic in terms of HVAC in restaurants, and whether or not there's going to be sort of like you have to have this level of air circulation in order to have a place where people are going to sit and eat and be together. There needs to have a certain level of air exchange that occurs, and a lot of those kinds of regulations as they roll out will be hard on on upstart, and new restaurateurs. And we have to see what, those barriers to entry that come from the law, and the law's got a good reason behind it, but it does create a barrier to entry for new people.
Yeah.
That makes me wonder if curbside is going to stay a thing. Maybe you don't have dine-in service, but you have cooks and chefs who are producing really good carryout. And that also reminded me of how Michael's started with the gas stations. The reason there was such a massive wave of closures of locally owned gas stations in the 80s was because federal environmental protection laws basically shut down every mom and pop gas station in the city who couldn't afford to upgrade their tanks. So their loss was Custard's gain, and no one could have predicted that change. So we may be surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been interesting going forward with all of this, with the delivery and curbside pickup, where I have the restaurant experience. I haven't necessarily been as critical, or I guess I've been much more generous. Like when I get an order from someplace, it's like, well, this isn't the actual experience. This is, the best that everyone's doing with the hand that they've been dealt. And that's certainly been interesting. So in a way, I've certainly eaten at a lot, or, from a lot of places, but I also don't know if I would say that I have eaten from these places specifically.
Right. It's a good point.
Yeah. No chef is going to want to be, marked down for, the experience that we're all having right now with this whole year that just has this massive asterisk attached to it.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
Early on in the pandemic, I kept getting people being like, "Are you going to review takeout?" And I said, "No, I'm not," because it seems like fully unfair to, pretty much everyone. For starters, as you all well know, when you're ordering to write about it, it's very different than if you're just ordering for yourself. Like, I try to get all these different proteins and different parts of the menu and really get the representation. I'm not going to eat at home that way. I would die. You have to have help, you have to have help. And then this idea that they're going to make something beautiful and then put it in a little box and send it home with me and I'm going to eat it 40 minutes later, that's just unfair. So what's been interesting too is that I feel like I love food, as you all know, and I love to cook. And I sometimes don't feel like it's worth it. Like, I feel like, well, if I'm going to have to get it from a box, like, I want to have the experience. I want to sit up at the bar and, play cards and eat my food.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if there were any, Chris, you've been sort of talking about this for a lot of the pandemic, about sort of reminiscing about places that we miss, or just wanting to recognize them. And I know, for example, for me, I miss the Robin Room. I love the Robin Room. And I really would have loved to go inside the Muskie in the Lake Edge neighborhood and on Madison's east side where I live. And we can't go inside there. I can see the murals from outside. They look really cool. But so there are places like that I'm missing. And also Sardine for me. I love the French vibe there. But are there places for all of you that you miss right now?
Man, really anywhere where I could sit down and have a cup of coffee with a person across the table. Really anywhere, pretty much.
Yeah. Nicole's a big Collectivo fan. I think that's probably her.
Yeah, that's kind of
her go-to for that.
It's kind of ouchy.
And a lot of places have built on their really nice views. Like, I can eat a nice meal anywhere, but if I can eat with a lake view, I think about a year ago, maybe a little bit. As a matter of fact, my parents had their wedding anniversary in December, and I think we took them last year to Captain Bill's. Is that right?
Yes.
And it was a snowy evening, but you get a nice view of Lake Mendota with the snow coming down on it, and and they had a nice warm fireplace there, and you're just not, it's feeling. If I really want the food experience, I can get curbside if I'm willing to brave that. But most of the time, what I'm missing is is just the place and the people that I ate with, that I could sit across the table from, and yeah.
I miss the spontaneity.
Oh,
Like the number of times that I have not been hungry at all, but have just walked into an Ian's and walked out with, the mac and cheese, slathered in hot sauce. I mean, like that can't happen now. Or the late night menu at Tornado, where I would just be around there. And it's like, well, what are we going to do now? Oh, well, let's go and just, pull up a stool at the bar at Tornado because it's 10 o'clock and I can now get, very, very reasonably priced food off their menu, which, just to throw it out there as well, of all of the delivery food that we have gotten, well, we did pickup, Tornado. I had a birthday last weekend and we did that as my birthday meal, and that held up beautifully and the presentation was wonderful. And yeah, Tornado Room for curbside was magnificent. So fried fish made it home and hung out and was some of the best fish fry I've had. So delicious walleye. Anyway, but yeah, I miss the spontaneity of things, because even now it's, if you're ordering, it's, you're still waiting 45 minutes at least, if not more than that, for something to show up.
We did get curbside from Quivies for our wedding anniversary. That was sort of the one time we splurged on that. But that's the other thing, is that like so many places were for like, oh, let's meet my friends here and we'll go and we'll eat and we'll talk, and this will be the place that we do it. And just like, there's none of that. There's no like, oh, I'll get takeout from there and you get takeout from there and we'll eat on Zoom together. Isn't quite the same. Just isn't quite the same thing. And then, of course, I guess I'll throw this one out there from a personal note, which is that I was on a pretty good active trivia team when we hit lockdown on the pandemic, and we are not doing that at present.
yeah.
I mean, I used to host Geeks Who Drink pub quiz. And yeah, that was the first thing to go. I remember I was actually hosting at Hopcat, now the dearly departed Hopcat. And when in the middle of the quiz is when I started getting the one to cell phone notifications of Tom Hanks has COVID, and then directly after that was the NBA game getting evacuated. And so that night was the one where I was like, oh, this is done. Like, we're like, trivia's done. Like, we are officially going to be done with life as we know it for the foreseeable future. Yeah, trivia. Miss it.
Yeah. So maybe to wrap us up here a little bit, I wonder if we want to just share any highlights that we've had of this year from delivery or pickup. Like, for me, it was definitely Papavero. Earlier in the pandemic, I got some gorgeous food from them. And also, I loved getting the Dexter's fish fry. Like, shout out to Dexter's. That was really great. Loved that fish fry. It was really good. So those were my two. But yeah, if we maybe want to wrap up and just say any highlights or shout outs to places that have gotten really great curbside, in addition to Tornado, already mentioned.
A momentary resurrection of the eating in Madison A to Z aesthetic.
Yes.
Oh man, this is a tough question. We have been so out of the loop, you guys.
That's all right.
Our standby has been Chipotle drive-through burrito.
What's nice about the Chipotle is that you don't order there. You order on the app and you just pick up.
Nice. Efficiency.
Yep. Muya, touchless. Unfortunately, these are chains.
Well, ties. We've been eating a fair amount of ties.
So we did throw our chain thing out the window. Something about apps, just the convenience of it just trumped everything else, unfortunately. But yes, Thai's Asian Bistro, I would say it's close to us. They do contactless pickup in their little lobby, and it does stay fresh and delicious. And they have a wide variety of different dishes, from adventurous to standard pedestrian. And what I am going to miss about Thai's, though, again, was that experience. You go in there, and every once in a while you'll be treated to the fourth grade relative of one of the staffers practicing their Suzuki violin in the back room, and it's just like, you're never going to have that again, because they're all home safe, rightfully so. But it's just a totally different vibe.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I mentioned Tornado, but the prime rib at Brothers 3 was another real highlight that hung on. And they also had we got it for brunch, and so it also we added on a make your own Bloody Mary kit, which just came with a whole bottle of Fleischmann's. It was wonderful.
That's fun. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
That's really fun.
I think I need to do a Bloody Mary kit to go for like Christmas or New Year's this year. I think that's got to be part of making the holiday special when I cannot go anywhere. And my husband is a wonderful person, but I see him every day, and I'm not seeing anybody else. So maybe some Bloody Marys will help.
That's a great gift idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Dahlia, for making an appearance.
Thank you for having her and us. I hope that editing isn't too much of a challenge.
No. Are there any plugs you want to make? Places where people can get the book? I know on the site you go to great effort to highlight all the local places you can buy it, or any Twitter or Instagram accounts you guys have that are worth throwing out there?
Wow. We haven't been active in that at all. But if folks are interested in the book, you can get it digitally, safely at home, delivered to your electronic device through the public library. That would be my best plug to make. You can, of course, still buy it at your favorite local online retailer. And even in some Walgreens, they do have end cap displays from our publisher, so you can pick it up along with other stories of Wisconsin ghost tales and other postcard replica books and all kinds of fun blasts from the past. So, if you see it, maybe pick up a copy at your local Walgreens when you're getting your airborne and your masks and your hand sanitizer.
2020.
Oh.
Well, thank you again.
Oh, thank you.
Yes,
Thanks for having us.
It's wonderful.
This has been The Corner Table, a podcast about food and drink in Madison, Wisconsin, produced by the Capital Times. My amazing partner, Patrick Christians, composed our music, and our wonderful editor, Natalie Yahr, edits the show every other week. We love you, Natalie.
Natalie. Lindsay and I have both had such a good run here in Corner Table Land, and we have been so glad to share it with our listeners. You can, of course, still find food and drink news at captimes.com. In fact, there is a feature this week about holiday baking. So go and get some of that last-minute inspiration that we know you need.
Next week, I will be hosting a Cap Times Zoom event with chef and cookbook author Courtney Burns. That's Tuesday, December 29th at 7 p.m., and it is for members only. So if you want to cook along and ask questions during the demo, go to captimes.com and sign up.
And once again, this is my shameless weekly plug for the movie podcast that I co-host. It is called Just to Be Nominated. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. The next episode that's coming out, we have got a big year-ending talk about our favorite 2020 films, most of which you can find on streaming somewhere, and only a few of which we saw in theaters, because 2020 was not a great year for theaters.
I am Lindsay Christians.
And I am Chris Lay.
Thank you so much for listening. It has truly been a pleasure.
Truly. Our wish for you this week is something sparkling.
Champagne! Miller High Life, the champagne of beers.
sparkling grape juice so you can go all night. You do you.
We love you.
Cheers.
We actually said it at the same time for once. It's amazing. Took an entire year.
This podcast has been brought to you by Exact Sciences Corporation, the makers of Cologuard. Once again, be sure to learn more at exactsciences.com.